I'd like to introduce to you our presenter for today. Her name is Caitlin Mock, and she's a U.S. registered dietitian. She is certified by the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. She formerly served as a lead bariatric dietitian for the Ohio State University Medical Center. Now, Caitlin has over 8 years of experience, so I'm sure you'll learn a lot from her. So before we start, I'd like to explain how we'll go about our webinar for today. Okay, it's for the first 30 minutes, it will be Caitlin presenting, doing her presentation, and the last 30 minutes will be for a Q&A. Now, everybody will get the chance to ask questions, but during her talk, if a question comes into mind, just type in your question in the chat window, and at the end of Caitlin's talk, she will be trying to answer all of your questions, okay? Now, if we run out of time, you can still send your questions through, well, you can join our private Facebook support group and send all your questions there. You can also visit our knowledge base section under the Mexico Bariatric Services website. Okay? So now I'll give the floor to Caitlin. Hi, Caitlin.
Thank you, Hazel. All right, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about the post-gastric sleeve surgery and your success, and really focusing on the success for those first 2 weeks, because that tends to be one of the most trying times for patients right after surgery. So after waking up from surgery, we'll start in the hospital. It's going to take several hours before staff will bring you a clear liquid tray. That first meal typically consists of some type of broth, jello, and a low sugar juice. You're going to remember to go very slow at this point, taking sips only 10 to 15 seconds apart. Usually people are very thirsty, but you're really going to want to avoid drinking quickly, as this will likely lead to vomiting or even just kind of a coughing up of the fluid. So really take your time, once again, focusing on about a teaspoon sip. You're not going to want to worry about finishing any one item. Instead, I recommend to try a couple of bites of each item that's on the tray, and just to kind of see which one is going to sit best with you at that time. Generally, room temperature liquids are better tolerated than very hot or even ice cold. Next, at some point during that day, the medical staff will likely come by to help get you out of your bed, get you up walking in the hallway. For a lot of people, this is not something you look forward to. You're sometimes pretty sore after surgery, kind of depending on the different pain medications that you received and just kind of how you're reacting to everything in your body that's happened. But this is a really important thing to do. It helps prevent potential blood clots, but also helps reduce soreness the next day. So believe it or not, by getting up, and even when you are feeling tender and sore, you can prevent it from being worse that following day. Another thing that getting up does is it also helps maintain some of that lean muscle mass. Studies have shown that just 24 hours of bed rest leads to a measurable loss of overall lean body mass. And this is something that you really want to be cautious of, because we're trying to keep our metabolic rates going as we go through this process of weight loss. And so if that first day you're losing a measurable loss of lean protein mass, that's something that we want to try to prevent as much as possible. So even after you get up and walking, and they bring you back to your room, just even sitting up in your hospital bed or sitting in a chair as opposed to lying down can help keep some of that skeletal muscle intact. Day 2, you will continue on clear liquids, but typically at some point you will also advance to full liquids. Now, depending on the hospital and the surgeon, sometimes they will continue to keep you on clear liquids. That sounds a little bit harsh at this point, but after surgery, your hunger signals are decreased so much that you're probably not going to have a big appetite anyway. So even if you do stay on the clear liquids, it's not going to affect you that much. But if you do advance to the fulls, you'll probably be offered things like milk. You may have a protein drink at this point. Cream soup is a common thing to get on a tray or to have at home. Pudding and yogurt are good as well, as is the good old comfort foods of mashed potatoes and gravy. And you can also do some blended and pureed foods at this time. So once again, you're going to want to go slow. Try putting your spoon or fork down to help you kind of pause between bites. Your stomach pouch is brand new at this point and very tight, and so there's not a lot of forgiveness with the amount of food that you can consume at one sitting. So taking your time at meals is imperative to preventing episodes of vomiting. So the main item to focus on the first 2 weeks is staying hydrated. The most common and preventable reason that people are readmitted to the hospital after having some sort of bariatric procedure is dehydration. So really focus on getting in those fluids before even protein or other foods those first couple of weeks. While this may seem daunting, remember that many of the foods you'll be eating will help you to meet your fluid goals. So things like broth-based soups, sugar-free popsicles and jello, decaf tea, milk, and even your protein drinks can all help to hydrate. A general goal that we like to use is about 64 ounces. That's about 8 cups equivalent for you. All right. Another thing that you can try to do is infuse your water with sliced cucumbers, lemons, lime wedges, orange slices. This is something that I found works really well for a lot of people, and especially after surgery, sometimes you'll have kind of a metallic-y taste that people will notice with just plain water. And so adding a little bit of that infusion of some different kinds of fruits and vegetables can really help kind of take that away. I had one patient that had surgery actually this year in June at the height of strawberry season, and it was about driving her crazy that she couldn't have fresh strawberries. So she did this at home. She bought a pint from a farmer's market, came home, washed them, cut them up, and let them sit in water for about 20 minutes before she drank it. And it did give that water that essence of the strawberry flavor that she was craving so much. So it really, really does help. And then avoid carbonated fluids. You're going to see this several times during the presentation. Those bubbles, even a diet soda, really doesn't sit well in your new stomach pouch. And if you think about how small your stomach is now, can only hold about a half of a cup of food. Those bubbles kind of do a lot of jumping in that belly, and it does not do well. And then you want to stop drinking about 15 to 30 minutes before a meal and wait 30 minutes after to begin again. So I want to kind of take some time to explain the rationale for waiting to drink before and after meals. I feel like this is something that is confusing to a lot of people and is one of the harder things to adhere to. So if you think about your new pouch kind of like a funnel, if you were to drink a half a cup of fluids quickly and then begin eating before that fluid has gone through a funnel, you don't have enough space for that fluid to go, and that's typically what leads to vomiting. It is really most important to wait the 30 minutes after a meal to once again begin drinking than say before. So if you're before a meal sipping water and you're taking a small sip every 5 minutes or every 3 minutes or so, it's not as imperative to wait that 30 minutes. But if you're going to sit down and drink a half a cup of fluid at one sitting and then a minute or 2 minutes later sit down and try to eat a meal, that fluid has not basically funneled through your stomach, and that will often lead to the vomiting and even potentially stretching of your pouch. So you really will have to be cautious with this. All right. So you will be on full liquids and the blended or pureed foods for approximately 2 weeks after surgery. With this step, having the visual of a large straw that would be used maybe to drink a Slurpee or something is typically a good visual to have. So anything that could go through that straw is generally okay. And I say generally because obviously we want to avoid high sugar items or simple carbohydrates that could go through a straw as well. So really avoid those things, but any blended foods other than those high sugar foods go well. Once again, you'll want to follow this diet very closely for the first few weeks, or as your physician has recommended. Sometimes your physician will give you a slightly different time frame, and that's fine. Listen to whatever they're saying. But this is basically to prevent potential life-threatening leaks. Sometimes that staple line can get a leak if you're advancing too quickly, and you really, really want to avoid that for the obvious reason. Remember to eat regularly. I always recommend at least 3 small meals daily, and maybe trying to have a planned mini meal or snack about every 3 hours during the day. This can be something as simple as a half a cup of yogurt or a half a cup of soup. It does not have to be something that you spend a whole lot of time planning on. So items to avoid: raw fruits and vegetables, because of that potential to tear those staples or to cause a leak. Now, a ripe, soft banana is fine. You'll want to avoid those green bananas in the store that are a little bit firmer. Those do not sit well. So stick with the very ripe, soft ones. Dry, tough meats, especially plain, are one of the worst things for people. You want to add some moisture to those foods. And then oatmeal, pasta, rice, even when these items are blended, they tend to be very difficult. And it's not to say that these starches don't have some healthy qualities, because they do. While they're low in protein at this point, they do continue to swell after you eat them. So if you think about especially rice or pasta, if you cook it with water, obviously it swells. But then if you were to continue adding more fluids to it, which is what kind of happens with your saliva and your gastric juices, that swelling continues in your new stomach pouch and can be completely or very uncomfortable. So definitely avoid that. And once again, our good old carbonated beverages. Some good foods to have around the house: applesauce, baby foods, blended frozen fruit smoothies. Varying vegetable soups usually sit really well, and the baby food veggies do well as also. I typically recommend having some spices and herbs. You can even add a little touch of salt to these foods to give them a little bit more flavor. However, at this point, a lot of people want the comfort kind of bland foods, and so that's fine. Just sort of, listen to your body. If you want some hot sauce on something, that's fine. You're not going to do any damage. If you want something plain, that's also fine. So you also want to go online and just look for different recipes for soups, smoothies, high-protein puddings, to get you through those first couple of weeks. You'll want to have kind of an arsenal of things ready. What you think you may like and may rely on after surgery could be completely different than what actually is tolerated after surgery or sounds good. A lot of people have a sort of a change in their taste buds after surgery. So you kind of want to prepare for yourself that could happen to you as well. And depending, this can kind of be a good thing to have those taste changes, and sometimes it's a bad thing depending on the food and the situation as well. So more on foods to eat: the meat, poultry, and fish. These are obviously really good foods to have because of the protein content. The tuna salad and the egg salad especially go well for a lot of patients. Now, you'll want to leave out your traditional recipes, so no adding onions or celery or relish. Instead, once again, go to your spice cabinet and pull out your powdered celery seed, your onion powder, your garlic powder to add that flavor. And then using like a finely ground turkey, chicken, or tuna with a low-fat cream soup. This is once again one of those things that's usually very well tolerated, and it's a lot to do with that low-fat cream soup and adding that moisture to it. Non-fat refried beans. This is one of my secret weapons when it comes to those first couple weeks after surgery. This tends to be very well tolerated because it's nice and savory. You will want to look for a lower sodium version, but especially for people that have an aversion to sweets, which is fairly common, the refried beans tend to really sit well. And it's something different than mashed potatoes. A lot of people get sick of the mashed potatoes, and they give you, the beans give you a little bit more protein, especially when you add that melted cheese. If you are a mashed potatoes and gravy kind of person, that's fine. Do look for an unflavored protein powder that you can add. It won't give you probably a ton of protein, but it will give you those few extra grams that can make a big difference with your total protein intake for the day. Some more on a grocery list. Once again, adding those lemons, limes, and cucumbers for infusing water, milk and soy milk, cottage cheese, yogurt, regular cheese shredded that you can melt onto things, and some non-fat dry powdered milk. Now, some people do have a lactose intolerance that they didn't necessarily have before surgery. Sometimes it hits right after surgery, and sometimes it takes several months for this to kind of settle in. Everyone's a little bit different, and maybe it won't happen at all, but just something to kind of keep in mind. With regards to the yogurt, there is some natural sugar in yogurt, and that's called that lactose, once again, that we mentioned. So what you'll want to avoid is having a significant amount of added sugar. So generally, if you have a 6-ounce container of yogurt, if it has 20 grams or less of sugar, that's an acceptable amount of added sugar. Over 20 grams, I usually try to avoid it. And then winter squash, especially the acorn and butternut squashes, this time of year are really good once they're roasted and blended or kind of mashed with your fork. These are really well tolerated for a lot of people. You can mix different spices and herbs in them depending on what your preferences are, and they really do sit well. Some other things to have, bananas, canned fruit. Look for fruits that are canned in their own juice and not the syrup. Peanut butter or nut butter, you'll want to look for the creamy varieties, but these are well tolerated as well. Low sodium canned soups. Once again, look for more of a protein-based soup, so a ham and bean, a chili, different stews. The cream soups do well because they have that milk base. Sugar-free popsicles, the gelatin and the Jell-O. While these don't add a lot of protein, they do give you some of those extra fluids, and it can just kind of be a nice little treat to break up the day. Having a variety of baby foods on hand. I probably wouldn't go out and spend a ton of money on baby food, but it can be something kind of quick and simple in a pinch if you're not feeling well or if you are having a lot of intolerances. And then people tend to do really well with the low sugar instant breakfast drinks as well. So some common mistakes that people go through the first couple of weeks. Really be cautious to not push yourself too hard. Most people tolerate anywhere from a quarter to a half a cup of food max at this point. And the heavier that something is, such as a blended meat or beans or the cheese, you get full much quicker from eating those foods than having a broth-based soup or some applesauce or yogurt. So kind of be cautious of that. You'll want to avoid that feeling of really a tight fullness or kind of that uncomfortable fullness. This often leads to vomiting, as that pouch, once again, is very new and very tight. It's not very forgiving. And if you continue to use that sensation of being kind of overly full as your gauge to stop eating, that can contribute over time to your pouch stretching. So you really want to be cautious with that. Having 2 dime-sized bites per minute, this is definitely something you'll see from this point on and throughout the presentation. And one of the things that I stress most to people is carry a dime with you or put a dime on your table and have that as a visual. And you really want to avoid taking more than 2 bites that are that size or smaller per minute. And that typically helps people when they're especially having a lot of intolerance or kind of vomiting or just having that sort of overly full feeling. And then the crispy, crunchy carbs. It is very common for me to hear someone say, I can't tolerate a lot of foods, but chips go down well. And I always say, well, of course they do. The crispy, crunchy carbs always go through a gastric sleeve well. And it's because if you think about that funnel again, these are the foods that break down very easily, which is why they aren't typically the healthiest foods to have around as well. So you'll really want to focus on lean proteins, your heart healthy fats, and those fruits and vegetables that you can blend and cook well. Another thing to be cautious of is not waiting to be active. A lot of people use these first couple of weeks to sort of sit at home and just recuperate, but there's a lot that you can still do. You know, taking a walk, getting on a treadmill, or using your elliptical machine if you have one at home, or if you go to a gym is completely fine. If you're used to a stationary bicycle, especially as we're getting into the cold weather months, that can be a great exercise. You do want to avoid a vigorous activity or resistance exercises like lifting weights. You can talk to your surgeon about that as far as what the timeline is that they recommend, but definitely use this time to be active. This is when you can continue to really raise your metabolism and really kind of spearhead that weight loss process. And once again, remember to hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. You don't want to have to end up back in the hospital just to be tethered to an IV pole. It's one of the easiest things you can do, and you just have to kind of focus on. So vomiting, I wanted to include the next couple of slides because vomiting is a side effect that almost everyone experiences at one time or another, and yet most of the time it can be completely prevented. Now, having said that, sometimes a food that is perfectly blended and a small amount still won't sit well, and that can just be kind of part of this process. So your new pouch takes some getting used to with what foods are really tolerated and what amounts you can tolerate. But if you are experiencing regular vomiting, you want to take a look at this list, and you'll probably find a reason why this is occurring just from this list. So you may be eating too quickly, not chewing your food thoroughly, eating foods or specifically meats that are too dry. This tends to be the big thing. Eating too much food at a time. So once again, think about that, a half a cup maximum the first several weeks, and really even a third to sometimes a quarter of a cup, depending once again on how heavy or kind of how solid a food is. So those meats once again tend to hit your pouch a lot harder than a yogurt or cottage cheese. Eating solids too soon after surgery, once again, you're going to want to stick to that timeline. Drinking liquids with meals, drinking with a straw. So when you drink from a straw, not only are you getting that liquid, but you're also getting all of the air. And that air can be a barrier to allowing some of the food to come through. And then lying down right after a meal. You're going to want to wait anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. If you've had a history of GERD, you might want to wait a little bit longer, or acid reflux. All right, protein powders and shakes. So my biggest advice with the protein powders is to really try to get as many samples, even if you have to buy some of the samples, as you can, or getting smaller containers of products as opposed to buying in bulk. Very frequently what you try before having surgery and you think is delicious will not necessarily be what you like and or really tolerate after surgery. One of the exceptions to that is an unflavored protein powder. If you do find an unflavored that is very soluble, so it mixes into water well or mixes into milk and doesn't leave a powdery kind of substance or doesn't clump, that's a good product to have, because the unflavored protein powder you can really add to almost any foods, whether it's soups, your protein drinks, mashed potatoes, yogurts, hot cereals. It's a kind of a secret weapon in the bariatric community. So there are lots of different protein powders out there. The most common one would be a whey protein, and there are really two main types of whey protein. There are actually a little bit more than that, but the two big ones are whey protein isolate and whey protein concentrate. Now, whey is generally well tolerated and it's very soluble, so it dissolves well into water and other foods, but it does contain some lactose. So those people that are having lactose intolerance have to be a little bit more cautious with this. Now, the whey isolate, the way that I tend to remember it is that the isolate form tends to isolate the protein. So it's a little bit more high quality product, and because it just solely focuses in on that protein, a lot of that lactose is removed, and so you can find a lactose-free whey protein isolate, but you will want to read your label carefully. Just because it says it's an isolate doesn't mean that it's automatically lactose-free. Then there's also the concentrate. So the concentrate is also well tolerated, but it does normally contain some lactose, and it's not quite as high in protein as the isolate. They are both very good products. The isolate tends to be slightly more expensive than the concentrate, but they are both completely acceptable. Once again, really look at the labels, check for added sugars and extra fillers and whatnot that can be in there. There are other types of protein powder as well. Soy is a big one that's hit the market in the last 5 to 10 years. It's been around a little bit longer, but they've been working on it and making it better. It is a vegan protein, so if you have a lactose intolerance or a vegetarian, this is a good option for you. It tends to be not as soluble as the whey, and so a lot of times people have a harder time tolerating it. But having said that, I have a ton of patients that use the soy protein and really like it and do very well. So you can check out some different blogs and whatnot to see which ones people tend to like more than others. Now, men, you do have to be cautious with the soy protein. Studies show that having too much soy can actually decrease testosterone levels. So you'll want to, if you do choose to have a soy protein powder, you probably won't want to have this, multiple times a day. Men typically kind of get really freaked out when I mention this with the soy. It is completely defined to have some soy daily. The amount that actually is needed to decrease testosterone is very, very high. But I still like to be cautious and recommend people not to have really more than one soy protein drink a day if you are a man. And once again, look at those protein powders carefully. Look for the fillers, look for the sugars, see where, what all those ingredients are and what kind of the junk ingredients are that's in them. And really the best thing to keep in mind with this is if you go out and buy the best high quality product, but you can't tolerate or you hate the flavor of it, you're not really doing yourself any favor. So the best protein powder is one that you can actually use. Some food sources of protein. A lot of people that I talk with tend to underestimate the protein they're getting and or they overestimate it by a lot. So I like to use this slide as basically a quick guide to small portions of high protein foods that are generally well tolerated. Now, all of these foods do need to be mashed or blended or pureed to make them appropriate for this those first couple of weeks after surgery. And you'll probably notice from the slide that some of the foods have a range. So for example, the yogurt, a Greek yogurt is going to have a higher protein content because some of that liquid has been kind of sorted out, and so it's a more condensed protein versus a regular yogurt. The eggs, a small egg is going to have less protein than a large egg. So those are just some of the minor differences. The non-fat dry powdered milk at the bottom, this is another one of the secret weapons that I like to share with people, because if you have a hard time tolerating different protein powders, the non-fat dry powdered milk can be a great way to add in just a couple of extra grams of protein into different foods throughout the day. So maybe 2 or 3 teaspoons of the powdered milk in your yogurt in the morning, or a few teaspoons in a soup, or a cottage cheese. It's not going to add, 10, 12 grams at a pop, but it will give you maybe an extra 2 or 3 grams here and there that through the day can maybe get you from 50 grams of protein to 60. So it can be a good weapon in your arsenal. So a frequent issue that individuals have is really trying to figure out how to fit everything in. You have your fluids, your vitamins, the food, and then you have to wait those 30 minutes between. And obviously, the portions are much smaller than before surgery, but you're going to feel as though you're spending more time concentrating about meals and eating meals than you ever did before. And this is completely normal and will get easier with time. You're not perfect, and it does take a lot of flexibility and determination to kind of figure out the best schedule that works for yourself, but people do it all the time. This is just one example of how you can kind of make it work. Now, I didn't include the times in here because obviously everyone eats and goes through their day and wakes up at different times, but this is just a quick rundown of what you can do. You're going to want to notice that the calcium and the iron are always separate by at least 2 hours, and that's because calcium and iron tend to kind of fight for the same receptors in your body when you eat them, so you're going to want to avoid taking those two together. So some general tips. I've spoken a lot about these already, but they're very important. So that first tip is the one I probably speak the most of, and that's having that dime-sized bite at a meal or less. If you have grandchildren or children of your own, think about the first time you are giving them bites of solid food as a baby. And this is really how you need to think of your new stomach pouch. It's a brand new and needs that same care and caution that you would use to feed a child. Next, having a clock with a seconds hand that you can watch, or a lot of people have a smartphone now, using the stopwatch on your phone to track how many bites you're taking in a minute. Once again, aiming for that 2 bites per minute rule, and really keeping those portions small, half a cup at a meal or less. Using the clock this first few weeks, you're not going to be a fun dinner date because you're going to be so focused on that clock, but this really can kind of help to set that tone for after surgery, and to really help to keep you mindful, so that when you do go out with friends, or especially when the holidays are coming out, you're not having an emergency moment somewhere where, oh my goodness, all of a sudden you ate too much and you're vomiting. So it really kind of helps you to practice at home and to set the stage for the rest of this time. Having an immersion blender, this is another secret weapon and something that you can keep really easily in your cupboards and cabinets. It makes it really convenient when you have a meal that maybe you've cooked for the whole family or someone else has cooked, and all you have to do is put it in another container and just use that immersion blender to make it appropriate for surgery. Another good thing to have is to pull out that crock pot that's collecting dust. Crock pot meals tend to be so well tolerated because they're already very soft, moist meals. And so there's not a whole lot that you need to do with them to make them good for post-surgery. And on that same kind of principle, adding low-fat gravies, cream soups, and even avocado to drier foods like some of the meats and even some vegetables can really help with tolerance. And then the last tip is, if you're an individual that's used to drinking a lot with meals, or if you're really struggling after a meal to not chug that water, try having an Altoid or another just simple hard mint on the table. And this can really help to kind of cleanse your palate after a meal and make it easier to wait that 30 minutes. The last real big tip that I have and thing that I see people struggle with is not having enough measures of success. Measuring your success is not just the pounds that you have lost. While this is important, it's not the end-all be-all. The surgery will not suddenly make everything in your life perfect, and frequently that dream weight that many of us have in mind is just not realistic. So I really encourage everyone before or soon after surgery to maybe measure different parts of your body with a tape measure, whether it's your thigh, your neck, your waist, because during times when you're having a slower weight loss, or maybe you're going through a weight loss plateau, which will happen, by the way, it's frustrating, but stay the course, you'll usually continue to lose centimeters or even inches while that scale is not moving. So that can make a big difference to help you stay motivated. Also, making a list of activities that you would like to do. They can be as simple as, I want to be able to walk 1 mile continuously, or I want to go to the grocery store and not get winded walking in from the parking lot, or I want to be able to walk around the store without having to get in a chair or to rely on the grocery cart. I had one patient a few years ago, and this was the sweetest story. She was expecting, or her daughter was expecting, her first grandchild that year that she was having surgery, and her goal was that she wanted a lap for her grandchild so she could read stories into play. And so that's just one of the many things you can use to measure your success. Also, if you've had a history of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, triglycerides, this is another good way to keep track of those numbers, because you will see those numbers start to get improved or start improving once you've had surgery. And really be realistic with long-term weight loss goals. You might not get down to that high school weight, and that is okay. What's really the most important is how you feel and your general health and the quality of life that you're experiencing. That will improve with making healthy lifestyle changes way after those scales start to slow down. All right, at this point, I'd like to allow some time for questions and answers. I don't think, if you see on the panel, there's a questions tab. And if you have a question, you can go ahead and send that in. I do see, let's see, a couple it looks like. I'll have to scroll to the top. But before I do that, I do want to point out the 2 resources that we have at the bottom of the page. Our Facebook group is just getting started, and we're excited to have everyone really begin to experience that with us and participate. I'll be logging in several times a week to help answer your questions. We will also have some postings about surgery, and you can chat with other patients to learn about their experiences as well. This is one of my favorite tools to have as you go through this process, because it really allows you to connect with others that are going through or have been through the same experiences as what you're doing. And then below the Facebook link is the Mexico Bariatric Services support page. This is a great place to learn more about the process of having surgery and to find other tools and information. And then also on your panel, there is, let's see if I can find it, the poll. So I will be sending out a poll just to see if this webinar met your expectations for today. Please let us know. Okay, so let's go back to your questions. Bear with me as I try to scroll through these. Let's see. So our first question is, please address failures. I have been unable to make the lifestyle changes needed and have not lost any weight. I live with horrible shame. Everyone expects me to be thin by now. I have had no follow-up contacts at all. So, one of the main things I feel like people really struggle with is you haven't had significant weight at this point, is you really need to try to increase that activity. Some of us have not been very active, especially if you've been overweight for a long time. Our bodies become very efficient at running off of a very low amount of calories. I've had so many patients that come in before surgery and they tell me what they eat or they have eaten for the last year or two, and they're only eating maybe 1,000 calories a day or 1,500 calories a day, which is very very low. And they say everyone expects me to be eating a lot, but I'm not. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you're not staying active, if you're not able to have an active lifestyle, your metabolic rate tends to lower. And so you really have to kind of fight that, especially if you're a woman. It's unfair, but we have less muscle mass, and so we really have to rely on those resistance activities. So it's not just enough to get on the treadmill, but pull out those hand weights. I like to go by the ankle weights or the wrist weights at a Target or Walmart and walk with those, because that little bit of extra weight, even if it's a couple pounds, can make a big difference to raise your metabolic rate. And then the lifestyle changes, that is something that comes with time. It doesn't happen in one day, and I have a lot of people that get super frustrated about the fact that they're not perfect, and they make one mistake, and so they think, oh, I've made a mistake, that's it, I can't do this. Whereas it's, you will make mistakes, but you have to learn from that mistake, and you have to ask yourself, did I make that mistake because I didn't plan ahead? Did I make that because it was just an emotional decision? And try to see what you can do to prepare for the next time that you're in that similar situation. I think the big thing with making those everyday lifestyle changes. And I always attribute it to, if you think about a flat tire, when you see someone on the side of the road with a flat tire, they're usually, on the phone with AAA, or they have a tow truck there, or they're trying to change their tire. I never see anyone get out of the car and grab a shotgun and shoot their other 3 tires, right? That doesn't make sense. But when we're trying to eat healthy and when we're trying to make lifestyle changes, we do that to ourselves all the time. We make a mistake. We start the day with a donut instead of oatmeal, and we think, that's it, the day is done, I screwed up. Instead of thinking, what can I do the next time to really prepare? So maybe I had a donut for breakfast. That's okay. Try to have a really good grilled chicken salad maybe for lunch, or some steamed vegetables with a lean piece of meat or tofu or whatnot. Kind of prepare for the future instead of just dreading on what happened a few hours ago. All right. Let's see. So someone's going on 3 years post-surgery. They put on 10 pounds this summer and it will not go away. I was in a wheelchair all summer recovering from an ankle replacement. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's unfortunate. So yeah, when you have a situation like that where you're not able to be as active and you're sitting around the house, you do get that kind of boredom, hunger, and you do eat more. And that weight does have a hard time coming off, because when you're not active, once again, you're losing that muscle mass. So you lose, that tone that you had before. And so when you start to eat, you're replacing that muscle with the fat weight that you don't want to have. And so it tends to be a lot harder to take off that weight than it was, obviously, to put it on. So looks like you're swimming. I think that's a great workout to start off with. Walking is good. Once again, getting the ankle weights or the hand weights is a great activity, and focusing on that resistance exercise. So, going to the gym, lifting some weights, doing a little bit of cardio. You also want to, take some time and reasoning with this, because you're not going to want to re-injure yourself. But again, increasing that physical activity is usually a big part of this. And then just taking some extra time to plan your meals at home. Make your grocery list for the week. Try to figure out what you're going to have for quick and convenient meals that you can do every day. All right, let's keep going. Bear with me again. I have to scroll through a very small area to see this. Okay, so all right, so someone is having nausea at about 3 months, and it sounds like this has continued. So, and they want to avoid eating. So if you're 3 months out from surgery and you're continuing to have day in and day out nausea, one thing I would definitely do is go to your primary care physician and have your labs drawn. They're gonna want to check all of your B vitamins, as well as B12, folic acid, and your iron levels. And just to make sure that everything's as it should be. That's a good place to start. Anytime you're having a chronic issue, whether it's nausea, or you're tired, or something's tingling, or just something doesn't feel right, I always say start with the vitamins and getting your labs checked. That's something you're going to want to do at least once a year from surgery, and sometimes more frequently, kind of depending on just how you're feeling. Our body goes through different hormonal changes, and so that's something you're going to want to be aware of. So definitely start there with the vitamins and minerals, and getting those labs checked, and just making sure that you're also taking your vitamins and minerals regularly can help to prevent some of that nausea. And then I would take a look at the slide pages that I've included here about the vomiting. Just look at your portion sizes. Are you maybe eating a little bit too quickly? Are those bites possibly a little bit too big? Sometimes people, even 3, 4, 5 months out from surgery, will have a difficult time with dry foods, and so they'll have to stick with the moister foods, and that's where those crock pot meals can really come into play this time of year especially. All right, so I know it's possible to stretch out your stomach. I have noticed the ability to eat just a little more when I eat. Is there something I can do to get my stomach back before it stretches out? So let's see. This is a kind of a misconception. So after you have surgery, your stomach is very tight because that whole suture line where they remove that large portion of your stomach is very tight and very new. So there is some minimal stretching that will occur. I like to kind of call it loosening instead of stretching. So that pouch will loosen and you will be able to eat more food as the weeks and the months go by. And that's okay. That's a good thing. We want that to happen. What we want to avoid is the unnecessary stretching that occurs. And that's what happens when people kind of go back to old habits. They eat past that point of fullness. They're eating too quickly. They're eating and drinking a lot at meals. That's what tends to cause that pouch to stretch unnecessarily. So you will notice some loosening of it, and that's completely normal. But once again, just avoid that that excessive kind of stretching. All right. So the resources, I'm hoping, I've got someone asking to see the resources page. I'm hoping you can see the Facebook support group at the bottom. If not, just get in contact with us after, and we'll also be sending out this webinar, so you'll be able to see these slides again, so you can have you can reach those resources page, or that resource page. All right. So long term, as your cravings return, what food is good to stop your cravings? I have done 1 year of counseling, but sometimes I feel I want bad food. I do use my tools as I have learned. So it really depends on your cravings, what foods you can use. This is something that I really like people to spend a lot of time on and to think about those cravings and what foods they are. You know, I'm someone that tends to be a sweets girl, and so I really rely on my small morsels of dark chocolate, and having a small square of dark chocolate that I can just kind of suck on slowly and really enjoy the flavor of it, as opposed to just eating a handful of Oreos or something. If you have a sweet tooth like myself, having, once again, that dark chocolate is a good option because there are some health benefits to it. Once again, everything in moderation. But other, sweet things that typically work well are like a sugar-free Jell-O or the popsicles can kind of fill that void. When it comes to salty things, the further out from surgery you are, an air-popped popcorn where you add your own salt is really nice because you can control the salt that's on it or the butter, as opposed to just buying something from the grocery store that's the full fat, the full butter. Really be cautious of those. The popcorn, you do have to wash the portions, and some people just do not tolerate popcorn well, even 6 months after surgery. So that's something you kind of want to be aware of. Any of these cravings that you do have, I am very much a dietitian that believes in everything in moderation. And so if you want to have a small amount of whatever you're craving, that's okay, but it's mostly about planning it out and really, figuring out a time you're going to have something and watching the portion size too. Don't eat chips out of the bag, don't eat ice cream out of the container, because it doesn't have any accountability to it. You really want to look at the portion size, put it in a container, and be mindful of what you're eating. And if you're mindful of that, we can usually live with these cravings and have them occasionally without having detrimental side effects as well. All right, so I have lost 100 pounds and hit my goal weight. Great job. And I do not want to fail. That's good. Yeah, that takes, it takes some time to really, once you hit your goal weight, to really kind of become at peace with that and to not be terrified of regaining the weight. And it's once again, those lifestyle changes that I think really help people the most to really be comfortable with their weight and to kind of be okay, because once you hit your goal weight, that's not the end of the line, as many of you know. You're going to have times where life gets busy and maybe you can't cook your meals as well and you're not able to prepare foods as well as you were before, and so you'll kind of gain a few pounds. But it's in that process when you're starting to kind of gain and you're noticing that you're not able to do the things that you were doing before excuse me, to be successful, that you kind of have to rein in and start making some of those small changes again to be healthier. We all kind of fluctuate a few pounds, and that's completely normal, but just sort of being aware of those lifestyle habits and what's helping your success and those lifestyle habits that tend to hinder your success. Okay, so it looks like in the next couple of weeks, we are probably going to try to do another webinar that focuses a little bit more on the gastric sleeve guide that we've done. Once again, please try to participate in that polling question if you see it up. Let me try to, looks like, oh good, most of you have polled. Okay, if you have any other questions, go ahead and send them in now. Looks like we got one more. Okay, so let's see. Oh, nope, that's not another question. All right. So a few things that I have noticed, people are very concerned about losing their hair. This is something that a lot of people go through. It typically is experienced around weeks 6 through 12. It's very common to happen, between the calories that you're not eating, the decreased calories, the protein deficit that people usually experience the first few weeks, and just the hormonal changes. The hair loss is a very common side effect. Now, most of the time, it's not permanent, but it is something that most people go through it at some point or another. And once again, it's usually those first few months. There are a few things you can do to hopefully help lessen this, although this is not a guarantee. So, starting your multivitamins right away is very important. Making sure that you're actually getting enough calories in after those first few weeks. So I typically recommend for people to get at least 1,000 calories once they're at about a month, and sometimes a little bit before that, and really trying to focus on that protein again. The protein isn't as important, 6 months down the road after you've healed a little bit, but at first it really can make a big difference with, preventing some of those side effects. But unfortunately, it's not a guarantee. So it's something that we all just kind of have to go through. There are some vitamins that people, if you look up hair loss on the internet, that they'll point out. Biotin is a big one. But really, it's at this point with surgery, it doesn't do anything, and you'll just take a vitamin, then you'll have expensive urine because you'll pee it out. It's too much. So I really use caution against going out and getting any of those unneeded supplements. All right, so at this point, I think we will go ahead and end the webinar. If you have more questions, go ahead and you can go to our Facebook page and post those, and I'll be able to answer those in the next couple of days. I'll get online again this evening and try to answer some of your questions there. And you can go ahead and reach out to us for more assistance. I am calling and emailing patients to offer my assistance as well. All right, thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great Sunday.